into a modern context. What can we say about this? Oh, well, I know. The one more thing I wanted to say about it, this program that these tykes are pushing is a language skills program. And we don't know how long people have been bursting into this place. This may be the source of language. You know, where did language come from? We learned it from elves in hyperspace, is as good a possibility as any other. And this is still ongoing, this language reformation program. They want us to activate our language forming ability. And language in the DMT flash, as I said this morning, it's something beheld. Syntax is something potentially to be looked at, not to be heard. And we don't understand this because for us, language is something that you hear. We can't imagine a language that you see. But have you ever noticed the way in which we preserve clarity of intention in language with verbal metaphors? We say, I see what you mean. He painted a picture. It means we unconsciously believe that truth will be beheld. And some of you who are students of the ancient literature may know Philo-Judaeus, Hellenistic Alexandrine Jew, absolute contemporary of Christ, born before, died after. And in one of his treatises on the Logos, which he was always talking about, Philo-Judaeus presents an etymology of the word Israel, talking about the word Israel, and he says Israel means he who sees God. This is the meaning of the word Israel. And then he goes on to say this he who sees God. He's talking about that, and he says, what would be the more perfect logos? Now, I should assume most of you know the logos was an informing voice, a voice in the head, which was the sine qua non of Alexandrian spirituality. Socrates had it, Plato had it, the logos. So Philo-Judaeus asks, what would be the more perfect logos? And then he answers his own question. He says, the more perfect logos would go from being would go from being heard to being beheld without ever crossing over a noticeable moment of transition. Well, that is precisely what you encounter in deep psychedelic experiences and the DMT flash. You behold the logos. In the initiation of the experience, you don't behold it. You hear it. It sounds, in Michael Harner's wonderful phrase, like the sound of rushing water, or like the sound of tinkling bells. And it's very far away. And then it begins to come closer. You begin to form a picture of it in your mind the way you would form a picture of a Nepali marching band if you just heard it about a half mile away, and the pa, and it's getting bigger, coming closer. This is the elf parade, and when it finally comes into view, it actually goes, without ever passing over a noticeable moment of transition, from being heard to being seen, through the phenomenon of approach. You hear it before you see it, then you see it far away, then you see it very close, and when you see it very close, who cares what it sounds like, because you're seeing it. This more perfect logos is what the tykes, the spiritual helpers, want to teach. And I think that it's important to spend a little time on this, because I think this would have tremendous historical impact upon our situation if we could, by hook or by crook, create a more visible logos, a language which could be seen. You've probably all considered at some time or another, what would telepathy be like? And I think most people answer that question by thinking that telepathy would be for me to hear what you think. But how would it be if telepathy were for me to see what you mean? That's telepathy. If it puts you in the other guy's shoes, if you stand in the other person's shoes, you are the other person. To have a person's point of view is to be that person in regard to that single datum of experience. So I've spent time with virtual reality people and all these technical folks because I think that visual language is something that wants to be born. And it may be that can be technologically coaxed into existence, that we're going to have to wear goggles and have fast computer, or it may be that it can be physiologically coaxed into existence. There may be drugs which shift the processing of language from being an auditory phenomenon to being a visible phenomenon. Ayahuasca is an excellent candidate for this. If you spend time with the ayahuasca-taking populations in the Amazon, there's great stress in these populations on acquiring what's called an icaro. Icaro means magical song, and the icaro is a spontaneous chant-like song which comes to you during the intoxication. The thing that's interesting about these icaros is that they are critiqued as visual objects, not as sound. People never say of an Icaro, it sounded beautiful. They always say, it looked lovely. And then people will say, but there should have been more blue. This kind of thing. It's clearly being criticized as a visual modality. Well, I think that these ayahuasca-using people are at the cutting edge of evolution. They are forcing the evolution of the modality of language. It may be that the processing of language is not hardwired, not physiologically wired. It's a software function having to do with culture, language, upbringing, and so forth. Because some people claim they are great visualizers and that they do think visually and so forth. And we have no reason to deny this. So it may be that we are just a one gene or even an expression of gene ratio's difference away from an entirely different way of processing communication between each other. And this is what the New Age, the end of history, the anticipation of this great breakthrough that we can feel but not really outline is about. If that seems far-fetched to you, you should notice how far-fetched the original emergence of language must have been. Because I think people were fully people. And totally mute, or unable to articulate a thought, and then either an accumulation of neurons or some synergistic effect was brought into play, and lo and behold, spoken language emerged out of that. Well, something similar could happen to us. In the morning session, I talked about the forced evolution of language, paying attention to our language. I really think that the way to think of these psychedelics is as catalysts for the imagination. If any of you are chemists, you know a catalyst is something that when you add it to a chemical process, the process is tremendously speeded up. But in the end, the catalyst is not destroyed. The catalyst is reconstituted at the end. So psychedelics, one way of thinking of them, is as a catalyst for cognition. The original description of psychedelic drugs was they were consciousness expanding drugs. Well, if we take the idea that they are consciousness expanding seriously for even a moment, then we have to put a lot of attention in on this, because it's the absence of consciousness that is murdering us and our planet. We need all the consciousness we can get. We need to wring it out of computers, get it out of plants, raise it in ourselves and our children. Wherever we can get it, we need it. And the present, the present situation with the planet is very dire because of us. Our unchecked evolution in a single direction along the gradient of culture has now created a toxic planet that is an endangered planet. Since this situation has arisen entirely within the confines of history, aren't we going to have to look outside of history in order to redress this problem? I think so. And when we do look outside history, then we find the institution of plant shamanism there, waiting to inform us, to educate us, and to show us how to set our a course out of the present dilemma. I don't think we can find our way out by ourselves. I don't think we can get high by ourselves, and I don't think as a species that we can save this planet by ourselves. We have to have a partner. We have to get an ally into this situation. Just in closing and as an example, the mushroom has a tremendous problem-solving ability. And because we can talk to it, we can ask it questions. We can actually get a non-human perspective on human problems. A few weeks ago, I made this statement before a group of people somewhere, and after the talk was over, somebody came up to me